The 1960s in America were a time of civil unrest and dissent. The escalating war in Vietnam, along with the civil rights movement, encouraged people to find their voice and to use it.
Because the American protesters are holding out the last hope.
University campuses became protest hotbeds as many young, educated Americans were drafted against their will into military service. Confrontations escalated. University presidents were responsible for dealing with the conflict. Many presidents supported the government and called in outside force to quell campus resistance. At the University of Oregon, President Robert D. Clark preferred discourse over violence when he was forced to confront the growing crisis of the war at home.
It was pretty clear that across the country, the anti-war feeling was rapidly increasing. So when you're 17, 18, 19 years old, you're thinking, I'm next. For me, it was like, finally we're going to take control because we had no control over our life. We were going to get drafted, and we had nothing to say about it.
And it was their feeling that if they had enough demonstrations on enough campuses across the country, that they might get the government to change its course.
As universities exploded in activism across the country, their administrators were held responsible for the protests. After creating a distinguished honors college at the University of Oregon, Robert Clark left Eugene to become the president of San Jose State College. There, he led the campus through some of the most turbulent moments of racial strife in the history of the country. After successfully guiding the school through the 1960s, Clark returned to Eugene to become the president of the University of Oregon. When he arrived in the fall of 1969, he was met with demands for student participation in running the university and fierce protests against the war.
They wanted me to end the war in Vietnam, and I couldn't do it.
It was a year of more confrontations at the University of Oregon and everywhere else, a year of protest.
The issue was, okay, we're mad, we students, we're mad. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do to defy authority?
The ROTC was a quite controversial issue on this campus, and there were students and some faculty members who believed that the fact that the University of Oregon supported ROTC meant that the University of Oregon was giving support to the Vietnam War.
That I thought students who came up through ROTC on a campus like ours got quite a different perspective than they might have had if they went into the Army without any university setting or expression of opinions.
The university faculty members decided in a very close vote that the ROTC should remain on campus.
Immediately after the University Senate had voted on April 15, 1970, an angry mob of students stormed the ROTC building and proceeded to march through it and destroy it. However, the crowd returned that night, hurling rocks and flaming torches at the building, only to be chased off by the EPD, who arrested several protesters and took them to jail. With a lingering distaste for the Vietnam War and upset that the ROTC was still on campus, students occupied Johnson Hall, the school's administration building, on April the 22nd. When the students were still there in the morning, Clark had no choice but to call the Eugene police to remove and detain the protesters who remained in his office. The arrests went peacefully until the National Guard came onto campus to disperse the protesting crowd with military-grade tear gas, a result of a miscommunication at the governor's office.
They were mobilized by the governor's office because the governor's office thought that the protests on campus were moving out of control.
If the governor wants to run the campus, I said, you can tell him to come down here and take over. The National Guard was communicating with the local police, and the communication broke down. They came marching, and not only marching, but throwing tear gas. And that's where the real problem arose.
It was a standoff because on one hand you have armed law enforcement officers, and on the other hand you have thousands and thousands of people. And I was frightened, to be honest. And the crowd dissipated, and fortunately nothing violent occurred on that particular night.
At the end of April, President Nixon announced his plans to invade Cambodia. University campuses exploded in activism against the expanding war. But on Monday, May 4th, the collective voice of the nation was silenced.
It's one thing to protest, it's another thing to get shot.
Kent State was the moment that many point to as the climax of the anti-war protests.
I was frightened about what could happen because they were just students like we were. And one slip finger and it's all over.
He felt devastated by that. He stood out in the front steps of Johnson Hall and addressed the students about Kent State.
Things quieted down a lot because now you're thinking, if it can happen there, it could happen here. I think Robert Clark was the right person to deal with the University of Oregon because it was a wild time.
As the country worked through what was to become one of the darkest stains on its history, the leaders of universities became major contributors to the outcome. Robert Clark was willing to work with students rather than against them, which enabled him to protect their interests and their safety. Because of his unwavering resolve and dedication to respect, he proved that force is rarely the path to victory.
To this date, I can tell you that in this man was no artifice, but the candor, the courage, the intellectual honesty, the devotion to ideals that we still hold dear was real and genuine.